watching, please like and subscribe to our channel. So today we are going to talk about the NICU some more. So I went over and we kind of briefly did like the medical side of the girls' NICU stays, and then I did some of the emotional journey from their NICU stays. And today we are going to kind of do like a day in the life, like what our NICU days looked like. So I was super lucky. We live right outside of Atlanta, and Atlanta actually has the #1 hospital in the world for the most deliveries. So that's where most people deliver. I did not. And it actually really worked out in my favor because the hospital that I was at was not super crowded. I was actually able to board after I had been released as a patient. So I was able to stay at the hospital in the room that I was in while I was a patient for between 3 and 4 weeks, I think, before they needed that spot and before I had to go home. So that made it a lot easier for a lot of my stay because the units were on the same floor and I just could walk down the hallway to go see the girls. So while our girls were in the NICU, they were on a 3-hour schedule, which means that they ate at 8, 12, and 4 around the clock. So I breastfed, I nursed the girls, but in the beginning, they were not ready, their bodies weren't ready to be able to eat by mouth. So the first couple of days, they got all their nutrition through an IV. It's really called a PICC line, but it goes into their blood system so that they're getting all the nutrients that they need while their tummies are growing and getting ready to eat real food. So they didn't need anything. They didn't need breast milk for the first couple of days because they were on TPN, but I had to start pumping to hopefully work on my supply and bring my milk in and all of those things. Which was super hard. My milk didn't come in really good, probably close between like 7 and 10 days. It took a good while. And I think that I'm just one of those people that I don't really respond super well to a pump. Babies are much more efficient at emptying, and I had a hard time. Pumping is a labor of love, and I don't know how the mamas who exclusively pump do it because I hated every minute of pumping. So I pumped to start to get my supply in, and I would take that to the NICU every time that I pumped. When the girls first started eating, they still weren't eating by mouth. They were fed through, it's called an OG tube, which is an oral gastric tube, which they put through their mouth and it runs down into their tummy. And when they first started taking feeds that way, they were getting 2 mLs. 5 mLs is a teaspoon. 2 mLs is like nothing. So we started with that, and each day they would increase some. So their feed times were 8, 12, and 4. So I always made it a point to be in the NICU at those times, especially in the beginning because we couldn't really hold them. We couldn't do much with them. They didn't want us holding them a lot. We couldn't touch them a lot because we really didn't want to stimulate them. We needed them to rest and grow. So I was sure to be there during those times though, because that was also when we changed their diapers and take their temperatures. So I started doing that really early. So I would get there like 10 minutes before they were due for a feed, and I would go ahead and change diaper and take the temperature, and then I would move to the next baby. So we did that every single time until the girls left, but it was maybe a week or 2 before I could like really start holding them a lot more. So I feel like I never really slept. I mean, we had babies, but I guess everybody feels like that. But I was pumping every 2 to 3 hours and it was insane. So like, I feel like my schedule just got completely off. I didn't really have nights and days. But so I would be in my room for the majority of the time, I guess after midnight, but then I still had to go back to my room and I had to pump and get everything ready. And then I would try to fall asleep and then I would have to wake up and pump again. So it was just like a vicious cycle. But so I would try and be there. Sometimes I would skip their 8 a.m. feeding and try and get some rest. And I usually, when I was staying in the NICU, would usually go over, when I was staying at the hospital, I would usually go over to the NICU around 9 or 10 in the morning. And then I really was there like all day. I had a really hard time even just doing like basic things like feeding myself. I didn't want to leave the NICU, which sounds so stupid, but I felt like all of those normal things were taking time away from my babies. And I already couldn't hold them and like do all of the normal things that moms get to do. So it just made it even harder. I would leave to pump for a while, which I really don't know why I did that. Maybe, I don't know, my sanity. And so that was another thing. Like I think that might be another reason that I hate pumping so much, is because I associate it with having to leave the girls and do something that I didn't want to do versus stay and be able to be with them. So I would leave and I would pump. Eating, going to get food took me away from them. So often I would just choose not to, which don't do it, especially if you're nursing, trying to get your milk supply up, because you need food, calories, and fluids to produce a lot of milk. So not the best idea. So once I would get there from like 10, I usually stayed from 10 until after their 4 p.m. feed. And then sometimes I would go back to my room. Our NICU shut down between 7:30 and 8, so that the nurses, that was during shift change, and the nurses would go over, report and go over what all happened, what the plan was, what things had changed, and all of those things. So because of HIPAA, which is privacy, they would close down the unit. So I was forced to leave from 7:30 to 8, which was usually when I would like go and get dinner, food. I would go back to my room and eat it. And then I would go right back to the NICU for their 8 o'clock feed. And it would start all over. So that really was all I did in the beginning. As they started getting bigger, as they started getting more stable where I could hold them, I was there the exact same amount. I would go, I would change them. And after we got all of the girls changed and temps and their feeds were going, then I would typically hold someone. And the way that I did it, I typically would hold after their feed for at least an hour to 2 hours. And then I would put them back, and then I would hold the next baby after their next feed, so that I wasn't just going up and down, putting babies in and out. I'm trying to think of what else. I mean, that really is like all I did for close to 2 months. Once they got to about 34 weeks gestation, or when they would have been 34 weeks gestation, they started showing signs that they were ready to start eating by mouth. The biggest thing they're looking for is a suck, swallow, breathe reflex. So when babies are eating, they suck, swallow, and then they take a breath. They suck, swallow, take a breath, suck, swallow, take a breath. And that is a reflex, and it doesn't develop until about 35 weeks. So once they started seeing that they were doing that or could do that, I was able to start trying to feed by mouth. And the way that you work on that is with a pacifier. You give them a pacifier, and it's called non-nutritive sucking, simply meaning that they're not getting nutrients from this sucking on this object. So sucking on a pacifier is non-nutritive. Sucking a bottle is nutritive. So they did that. Hayes was our first to show readiness, and we started her first. So when we first start feeds by mouth, they take like nothing. It's really like them learning and still getting used to that. I feel like by the time we started their PO feeds, they were up to, I want to say around 25 to 30 mLs per feed. So what we would do is we would put like 25 mLs into a bottle. We would allow her to try and take the bottle for no longer than 30 minutes. Whatever she didn't finish in 30 minutes, we would put down back into her tube so that she was still getting all of those calories. Hayes did really well. She picked up really quickly and started taking all of her bottles, but I still couldn't nurse. I'm trying to think. I think that Hayes was allowed to try and start nursing maybe a week after she had started her PO feeds. And I always say that I'm super lucky. I'm a speech therapist, and feeding is in our scope of practice. So I knew what we were up against. I think that one thing our society is really bad at is education on breastfeeding before a baby is born. There are so many people who do not realize how hard breastfeeding is, period. Even with a full-term, perfectly healthy baby, breastfeeding is hard. And I think that it's one of those things that our society just thinks, people have been doing this for millions of years. You have a baby, the mom knows what to do, baby knows what to do, put them together, boom, it's done. And that is not it. Mom has to learn what to do, baby has to learn what to do, and they have to get into a good rhythm together. And so I was lucky that I knew that. And I knew that we were probably gonna have a lot of trouble nursing, because I knew that they were going to get bottles before they were able to nurse. And a lot of times what happens is a bottle is easier to take than breastfeeding. So we see that a lot of babies will start to refuse breastfeeding because the bottle is easier and less work. So I knew that that was a possibility. And I was super, super lucky. I don't know if they knew, they could sense that I was calm, but they really, really did well, and that really shocked me. I was expecting to have to work really hard. So Hayes started. The hardest thing about breastfeeding is that we didn't know how much they were getting. We couldn't measure the volume. We couldn't measure how many calories they were getting. So when they first started breastfeeding, they could only nurse once a day. And then they would move up to once a shift, which would have been twice a day. And then from there, they moved up, and they would say they can try to nurse every meal or every feed. And if you don't feel like they got enough, if you feel like they need to be supplemented, then we'll give a bottle on top of that. And they actually did really well. We did, of course, it took a while, a few times, for them to be able to nurse and sustain themselves just from nursing. But they really did well overall. One thing that I wish that I had thought of, when you're in a situation like this, like you are not in professional mode at all. Like I was, I don't know what was going on, but I really, really wish that I had thought to ask to use a supplemental nursing system. it can be so beneficial. So what it is it's a little bottle that has the like teeniest little tube, and you slip the tube into baby's mouth while they're breastfeeding. So that is they're still stimulating the breast instead of just taking a bottle to get their calories. They're still stimulating the breast so that it's telling your body that you need to produce more milk, and they are practicing nursing, win-win situation. And then because it's in a bottle, you can measure how much the baby took in. And then on top of what the baby took in from the bottle, they were also getting breast milk while they were eating also. So it just helps to be able to measure some of those calories and see how much they were actually getting without like only having to give a bottle. So I really wish I had thought of that while I was there, but not a big deal. We still figured it out. I got kicked out of the hospital. I say kicked out. They needed their room around, like I said, I think around 3 to 4 weeks. And y'all, I was boo-hooing. I was sobbing. And I cannot, like, the only cry I have is an ugly cry. My face gets so red and my eyes get big and puffy and red and I look a hot mess. And everybody in the hospital knew me because I had been there so long. They knew that I was the person who had the triplets. Y'all, I know that they thought that they had died. Like, I was a hot mess and I really don't know why. I do, but it's just crazy. The thing is that I had to leave my babies. I went home without my babies, and that is not normal. It's not fair. It shouldn't happen. And when it does, it's really hard. And it's one of those things that you just don't know how you're going to react until you're actually in that situation. So poor Miss Sherry had to come tell me that they needed my room. I was a mess. I was crying. Oh my Lord. I know that people in that hospital thought that one of the babies had died, if not all 3 of them. So I went home then, and then I was still not allowed to drive because of my C-section. So then what would happen is my mom would drive me to the NICU, and I would get there for their 12 o'clock feed. I would feed them, and then I seriously stayed probably until 12 o'clock, right after their 12 a.m. feed. So my mom would take me, drop me off. She would sometimes come in and see the girls with me. And then I would stay at the hospital. I would go usually down to the cafeteria. Our hospital had a Chick-fil-A and Blimpie in it, so I would rotate between the 3. I would go eat from 7:30 to 8 while Chris, was it 7? I think it's 7 to 7:30. I think I might be lying to you. I can't remember. Either way, while shift was changing, I would go get food, eat, and then Chris typically got to the NICU around 7:30-ish, 7:45-ish, I think. And then we would go back in to see the girls, do their feed, and then hold them and spend time with them until Chris absolutely demanded that we go home, which usually was between 11 and 12. Sometimes I could convince him to stay until right after our 12 o'clock feed so that I could be there and feed them for those. And then we would go home and I would continue to pump and pump and pump and pump. And then I would wake up and do it all again the next day. So there really wasn't like that much. I really didn't have that much responsibility, but I did. I was there all day. I don't know, it was crazy. And it was just like, I would get through, especially once the girls started taking feeds by mouth, we would stagger the girls. And so the girls' feeds were, normally all babies are at 8, 12, and 4. My girls were kind of staggered so that I could feed them, especially once they started nursing. So I would do one, I feel like it was usually Hayes, Millie, Presley. So I would start to feed Hayes at 8. I would move to Millie at 8:30, and I would start Presley at 9, because I couldn't do it all at once. I was gonna have to go home at some point. I was gonna have to feed them at home. In the NICU, while they're on pumps, like, you set the pump up, push a button, and you can walk away and they're getting fed. When you're at home, you don't have that. And I couldn't feed all 3 of them at once. So we decided to stagger them like that so that it would be more realistic for when we were at home. And then I feel like by the time I would finish that, I had like an hour I would pump. So every time I fed the girls, I would also pump after to increase my supply. And by the time I would finish that, it was time to go back to Hayes and start feeding her again. So while I say like there was nothing to do, it was like I really had very little downtime because it was just constantly moving. After I would finish, and on, like I say 8, 8:30, 9, and it really probably was like 8, 8:45, 9:15, because I would have to get everything ready, I would have to change them and get them ready, try and start nursing, and if they weren't latching well, I'd have to, you know, do some work with them and all of those things. So it wasn't exactly on the dot, but it just was never ending. And then we went home. But so I feel like all I told you we did was feed them, change them, and take their temperatures, but there really is so much more to it. But that was basically our day, our life in the NICU. So please stay tuned. We will have another video soon. If you have not, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, and we will catch you next time. Thanks. Bye.